The film begins by showing a rainy night scene, in which a woman named Jennifer being pursued by a mysterious man. She tries to call 911, but it seems her attempt has failed because the call doesn't go through. Seeing a white pickup truck approaching, she immediately runs away from the place and enters a public restroom there. While the mysterious man is checking the toilet, she manages to escape and makes her way back to her car. But as it always does in this very moment, the car refuses to start, causing her even more panic as the mysterious man suddenly appears in front of her. Fortunately, the car's engine is able to start after several attempts. She quickly presses the gas pedal, but the car moves backwards instead, and it turns out that the car has been connected to the car behind using a cable. Since she has no other choice, she decides to get out of the car and runs from there. But unfortunately she is struck and knocked unconscious by a passing car.
What happened? Call an ambulance!
Jennifer is then immediately taken to the hospital for emergency treatment, and the medical staff mentions that she doesn't have an ID card with her. While the doctors are attempting to save her life, her husband named Russell Williams arrives to the hospital and rushes inside to see his wife, but he is not allowed to go inside. Soon after, the nurse masters informs Russell that the accident caused a bleed in Jennifer's brain, resulting in amnesia, in which she is unable to recall events from the previous night or even her previous life. The following day, Russell Williams meets with a detective named Frank Page, and he is interrogated about his wife's alleged incident. At this point, the detective is wondering and tries to find out what his wife was doing in the rest area alone, in the middle of the night with no ID. Russell explains that his wife only went to get groceries for dinner that night, and after that he didn't hear anything from her. He also says that they didn't have any problems before that. The detective then informs that Jennifer's car is missing and he will try to find out about the car first. Before he leaves, Page hands him his business card and expresses a wish to talk with his wife once she has woken up. After a few days in the hospital, his wife finally regains consciousness, and she sees flowers with a note from her husband. Not long after, she is visited by her husband, but Jennifer's amnesia causes her to become traumatized. Russell then introduces himself to her and tells her that her name is Jennifer Williams.
I'm Russell.
In order to help her in regaining her old memories, he shows Jennifer photos of the two of them. Russell then begins to talk about their past, where they both used to work in the same place before. Jennifer appears to be excited in hearing about their past, and she inquires about her own parents as well. Russell, however, responds with a sympathetic expression, explaining that Jennifer's parents died in a fire 2 years ago. Meanwhile, the detective is interrogating the driver who hit Jennifer the previous night. The driver tells Page that he didn't see anyone else at the time. But he mentions that he noticed a white pickup truck that was pulling the car by cable at the time of the accident. He also finds it strange as he has just remembered about that pickup truck. The scene then moves to an unknown man going to the hospital with flowers to meet Jennifer. But the nurse only allows a family member to come to visit her at this moment. The man simply says that he is just a concerned party who is at the scene of Jennifer's accident, and hopes the flowers will be delivered to Jennifer. As he walks away, Russell looks at the man with suspicion from a distance. The next day, Jennifer appears to be able to get along with Russell, and the two of them spend the rest of the day together in the hospital. After a few days in the hospital, Jennifer has now been given permission to be discharged, and has been provided with a cane due to the fact that her leg has not yet recovered. After that, Jennifer is now brought by Russell to their house in the mountains. When they get home, Russell takes Jennifer through all of the memories and activities that they had previously enjoyed there. At first, he tries to assist her in gradually regaining her memory by having her look at their wedding photograph. Jennifer then begins to wander around the house, but it appears that her bad memories are suddenly resurfacing in her mind. As a result, it always makes Jennifer to feel uneasy since she still can't remember of what had really happened to her. While Russell is cooking food for Jennifer, he suddenly gets a phone call from Detective Page, so he rushes out of the house to get a better signal. At this point, Detective Page informs that they still haven't found his wife's car. He did interrogate two men who claimed to have seen a white pickup truck near the scene, and one of them thought maybe the truck was pulling his wife's car. Detective Page then hopes that Jennifer will be able to meet him at the police station tomorrow at 11. Russell wants to refuse it because they have just returned home, but the situation forces him to comply with the request. Later in the day, Jennifer tries to ask about Russell's earlier phone conversation. It is at this moment that her husband begins to show suspicion by claiming that it is a call from his workplace. Since they both work in the same place, Jennifer asks if they are okay if she takes a long leave. But her husband says that Jennifer had left the company ever since they decided to start a family. Talking about her friends, Russell explains that they rarely see them since their move to the new house. He then tells Jennifer that he will buy her a new cell phone, because the police still haven't yet found it. The scene then moves to a man who had previously visited the hospital with flowers. Just as he is about to go inside the house, Russell suddenly appears from behind, and asks what his purpose of sending the flower. At this point, Russell doesn't wait any longer to show his psycho nature by hitting and killing the man, because he cannot see anyone else wanting to see his wife. He then takes the man's body to his home, and bury it in the backyard of his house. Not long after, Jennifer wakes up and she tries to call out her husband as she notices that someone is in their backyard. But instead, she is taken aback to see that it is her husband who is in the backyard, and she wonders what he is doing there in the middle of the night. The next day, Russell simply says that he can't sleep last night, so Jennifer doesn't ask much about it. He then tells Jennifer that he will be going to town to buy some stuff, as well as buy a new phone for her. But it seems like Russell has forgotten about his wife's appointment, as Detective Page tries to call Russell but is only connected to Russell's voicemail. At this moment, Detective Page really wants to meet with Jennifer, so he tries to search their home address in the police database under the name Russell Williams, but strangely, that name doesn't come up in the county he lives in. Therefore, Detective asks his colleague to trace Russell's cell phone number for him. He then continues his investigation by visiting the hospital and meets the nurse masters. Detective Page asks for the home address information, which Russell had previously given to the hospital. Meanwhile, Jennifer, who is alone at home, spends her time looking through old photographs of herself and Russell. She starts to smile as she looks through all of the photos and recalls her wedding day with Williams. But her smile comes to an abrupt halt when she comes across one of the photographs. In the photograph, Jennifer notices something strange, which is Russell's hair does not appear to be the same color as it does in the mirror. This raises her suspicions, prompting her to go downstairs and begin checking Russell's laptop. She tries a number of different passwords, including her full name, but she is unable to gain access. Short time later, Russell returns home and Jennifer quickly pretends to be exploring, in search of something she feels familiar with. Russell then gives her the new cell phone he bought, but when she turns it on, there is no signal since they are now in the mountains. The scene then shifts to Detective Page, who is visiting to Russell's home address, which Russell provided to the hospital before. But it turns out that the house is not Russell Williams, but rather someone else's, and the resident has never heard of Russell and Jennifer Williams there. The detective then calls his colleague and starts to think how Russell could have arrived at the hospital, since the hospital didn't have any contact of Jennifer's family to inform about her accident. Regarding Russell's phone number, the officer informs him that Russell used a burner phone and he couldn't trace it. Later that night, just as Russell is about to make out with Jennifer, Jennifer's mind is suddenly traumatized by memories of her past, and she cancels her intents to make out with him. As a result, Russell becomes angry as her own wife refuses to let him to touch her, despite his efforts in helping Jennifer in her recovery before. Feeling guilty of what he said, Russell apologizes and goes downstairs to keep an eye on Jennifer on his laptop. In the police station, Detective Page contacts the nurse masters and asks for surveillance camera footage of the hospital. He asks security to find out if there is any footage of the white pickup truck with a winch the night Jennifer came. At this point, Detective Page is wondering, since Jennifer had no ID with her, how did Russell prove that he was her husband that previous night? The nurse masters then explain that the doctor's note states that he showed some family photos and identified a back tattoo. As the detective learns this, he notices that Jennifer's back does indeed have a tattoo in one of the photos. After that, he receives an email from hospital security and immediately starts to check it. And this is where some of his big questions are answered, once he discovers that the pickup truck that the witness claimed earlier actually belonged to Russell.
Son of a bitch.
The following day, Detective Page tries to visit a tattoo parlor in the area, and inquires about the meaning of the tattoo design in the photo. The man tries to check it out and tells that the tattoo design means a name for Alan. Detective Page then begins searching for Jennifer's identity in the database, by exchanging Jennifer's last name with Alan. Using Jennifer's maiden name, he now knows that Jennifer shared a house with her parents in San Jose, so he rushes to that address right away. But after he arrives to that address, he finds that the door to the house has not even been closed. He tries to enter and notices that the house seems to have been abandoned for a while. At this moment, he begins to smell something bad, and that's when Jennifer's parents are found dead in horrific condition. On the following morning, while Russell is taking a shower, Jennifer, who is already filled with suspicion, tries to take his wallet and hide it. She then asks Russell to buy some groceries for her to cook for dinner. After Russell has left, she then checks his wallet and finally finds her driver's license card with her maiden name. Meanwhile, Detective Page continues his investigation by visiting Jennifer and Russell's workplace. One of the staffs there informs him that Jennifer and Russell had quit their jobs before their wedding. The man then shows Page a photo of Jennifer and Russell Williams when the company is holding a staff retreat. Well, everything is finally answered as the detective knows that the man who brought Jennifer home is not her husband. The man is even in the same photo with the real Russell Williams, and his name is Ryan Gardy, their co-worker. Detective Page then asks for any contacts that could help him find the man, without disclosing what is going on. Jennifer, on the other hand, rushes down to Williams' office, and it turns out that the laptop's password is her maiden name. It is at this point we and Jennifer get to see how Ryan begins his photo editing process, and Jennifer finds the original and unedited photo of Russell Williams. She finally remembers her real memories with her real husband, and realizes that the man responsible for her traumatic events is Ryan. Unfortunately, Jennifer intends to contact someone, but the internet tells her not to do so, and she sees that the internet cable has been cut. Ryan Gardy, on the other hand, has just realized that he has left his wallet and he is forced to return home. Meanwhile, Jennifer rushes out of the house and searches for a signal on her cell phone, only to find that her cell phone has been tampered with by Ryan. She continues to run, but she trips and falls near the spot where Ryan had buried the man's body. Ryan then appears out of nowhere and hits her in the head with a rock. Jennifer is brought back to her bedroom, and she then asks what Ryan had done to her husband. As Ryan hears this, he immediately chains Jennifer's leg and heads out to get some supplies. Short time later, Jennifer wakes up from her unconsciousness, and tries with all her efforts to let go of her leg. As she manages to free her leg, she comes out of the room and goes to the garage where she can smell the stench there. It turns out that her car has already hidden in the garage, so she tries to check the car and eventually manages to find her cell phone. Shortly after, Ryan returns home from the supermarket, prompting Jennifer to hide in the car. Ryan then opens the trunk of the car, and it turns out that the stench is coming from the body of real Russell Williams, which had been in the trunk. After Ryan comes out, Jennifer rushes back into the room, but she doesn't have enough time to tie her leg back, and instead has to cover her legs with a blanket. During their conversation, Ryan takes a suspicious look at the blanket that covers her feet, and attempts to open it. Fortunately, at the same time, they are startled by the sound of the front gate bell, and it turns out that their guest this time is Detective Page. Ryan has no choice and is forced to give the detective entry into his yard. As he gets in, Detective Page looks around and sees the Williams family nameplate. Well, he then reveals that the psycho man has also changed his family nameplate to the Williams family. Moreover, the detective is finally able to track down a white car, which is the only hint provided by the witnesses. Jennifer tries to call out the detective, asking for help, and tells him to go to the back door. But just as he is about to walk into the house, Ryan bursts in from behind him and knocks Page unconscious. At this point, Jennifer doesn't have time to do anything, and Ryan takes her back to her room. He then goes out to take care of Detective Page and grabs a rope. After that, he returns to the room and ties Jennifer's hands. Ryan eventually tells her everything about her memories, including the fact that he had always admired Jennifer before. Jennifer had been on his radar for a long time, and he had been stalking her and becoming obsessed with her over the years. But in the end, his efforts are futile because Jennifer chose Russell Williams over him, which made him furious. So he chose to kill Jennifer's parents, Russell, and anyone else who could get in his way. In fact, He should have killed Jennifer as well, but his plans change when he discovers that Jennifer is suffering from amnesia. Detective Page turns out to be inside the locked freezer and he's trying to break the freezer door. While Ryan goes downstairs to move the detective's car and get some water, Jennifer tries to grab a lighter to burn the ropes that ties her hands. It takes her a little efforts to let go herself, and she is able to burn the ropes before Ryan comes into the room. Ryan, who has just walked inside, realizes that she is no longer there. From behind, Jennifer slowly approaches and hits him until he passes out. Jennifer then runs away from there, and forces herself down the stairwell as quickly as she can, causing her to trip and fall. The rush of adrenaline coursing through her body encourages her to keep step out of there. Unfortunately, Brian has still managed to get to his feet, smashing the locked door and starts chasing Jennifer. Meanwhile, the detective manages to get out of the freezer, and forces himself to put an end to this madness. At this moment, Ryan and Jennifer are already in the forest, where Jennifer is doing everything she can to avoid Ryan. Jennifer then tries to hit Ryan from behind, but it doesn't work, and she rolls back down the ground like she did on the stairs before. After being caught by Ryan looks like he really wants to end her life, but Detective Page suddenly appears and pushes Ryan to the ground. As the detective is struggling to fight Ryan, Jennifer takes the gun and tries to shoot Ryan. In the end, she is able to help the detective by shooting and killing Ryan on the spot. 3 months later, Jennifer is now able to walk normally again, and she is paying a visit to Detective Page. The detective informs her that he will be moving to a new place and dating his divorcees. Before the film ends, Detective Page hands her a letter from Russell Williams which he received from the boss of their previous office. Jennifer then reads the letter, which states that Russell will always love her regardless of what will happen in the future.